Okay, hello, good afternoon everyone. Welcome. We are coming to you live from George Webster Elementary School. My name is Ben Clark. I am a board certified behavior analyst.
And my name is Amanda Ramsachit. I am also a board certified behavior analyst.
And today we are going to talk about sleep hygiene, sleep challenges, sleep training. So thank you for joining us, and I will get into our presentation. Okay. So our learning objectives today are that we're going to define common sleep problems, and we're going to discuss some interventions, some behavioral interventions that can be used to improve sleep as well. So I'm just going to try to figure out where to stand here. Okay. Just a quick disclaimer. Like any behavioral challenges, the most effective strategies are individualized to children. So we're going to talk about some general strategies today. If you're looking for further assessment from a board-certified behavior analyst or a member of our team, you can contact Community Living Toronto and participate in our home management program if you're looking for additional services around sleep training. So let's get into sleep problems. Very common for children that have neurodevelopmental disabilities. So between 50 and 80% of children with developmental disabilities experience some form of sleep challenges. And this number changes to about between 67 and 73% for children specifically on the autism spectrum. So lots of sleep challenges for those individuals. So issues with sleep can have negative consequences on children. So this can pose different health risks. It can also increase child irritability and temperament. It can increase the likelihood that challenging behaviors will occur, affect attention, and it can also have negative consequences for the larger family unit, parents, siblings, daytime functioning at work if you're up all night with children, and it can increase family stress and tension as well. So what are some common sleep problems? We're going to go through some common sleep problems that people often experience with their children. If you have any questions for our audience members that are here, please feel free to just raise your hand or interrupt. Hannah, if you want to moderate the questions online, just flag us down as well. Okay, so delayed sleep onset is a problem that we deal with quite often. So this is children who fall asleep later than the appropriate hour needed to have a full night's rest. So children falling asleep around midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, very late for their typical age or their developmental age. This could look like the child being tucked into bed and told to sleep, but they remain in their bedroom playing with toys or engaging in other activities. It could also look like them leaving the bed, looking for parents, siblings, getting attention through that as well. Or the child remains in bed, theirs or their parents, but they're not actually actively falling asleep. So they're in bed, but they're awake. So any of these we would call delayed sleep onset. Another typical sleep problem that we encounter is nighttime waking. So this is the child wakes up multiple times throughout the night, so they're not engaging in a restful sleep. They're not getting that full 8 hours of sleep. They sleep for short periods of time, and then they are awake. And this may result in low hours of total sleep for the child, and then also very poor quality of sleep. So if you're constantly waking through these cycles, you can have very poor sleep, and it can affect your daytime functioning, as we all know, because we probably had in our lives, a bad sleep night. Another common problem that we hear are early morning wakings. So I see some nodding over here. So early morning wakings are quite common as well. So the child wakes up earlier than expected.
Andre Adelson, come to the office, please. Andre.
Sorry. This could be, 3, 4 in the morning, so a time that is not appropriate for them, and then doesn't fall back asleep. So everyone's up in the house, parents are up, siblings are up. It can be very difficult to get them back to sleep, and this can result in very short sleep hours for that child. Additional problems are also sleep resistance. So when asked to go to bed, the child will refuse to go to bed. No, I don't want to go to bed. They will engage in a variety of different behaviors to avoid bedtime. So this may look like crying, screaming, or throwing items. The child continuing to do the activity they are asked to stop. So, trying to terminate a preferred activity like, playing on their iPad, playing video games, they're not listening, they want to continue that activity and not go to sleep. The child protesting no, or also different negotiating skills that our children can have. So, 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 1 more hour, that can go back and forth for quite some time as well. Sleep dependencies is another huge one that we constantly deal with as well with families that we can talk about. So this is a child being unable to fall asleep without access to certain tangible items. So they need to have, their iPad, the TV, different books or things like that. Or a huge one that we see in a lot of families is children sleeping with mom and dad as well. So as children age and they're still sleeping in their parents' bed, this can affect lots of different aspects of family life. It can be a mixed bag. So it can be one of these things, it can be all of these things, it can be a few of these things, right? They're not all mutually exclusive. Oftentimes when you have challenging sleep behavior, there's a lot of different overlapping issues, right? So, children can be protesting, they can be sleeping in your bed. There can be a lot of different behavioral challenges that families are faced to deal with. So a child with sleep issues can be experiencing multiple sleep issues at one time, very fun. When considering sleep, we also want to account for biological and neurodevelopmental factors that could be considering sleep problems as well. So we'll talk a little bit about those in a bit. So for instance, the child may not be ready to fall asleep because they have a lot of energy. They just ate a big meal. They had some caffeine. They're perseverating or worried about an upcoming event. So similar to any of our sleep problems, I know if I have like a Diet Coke past 3 p.m., I'm not going to sleep that night. I think caffeine and different biological stimulants can also affect children in many different ways as well. So they may be constantly waking up to use the bathroom because their bladder is full or uncomfortable. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can mitigate some of these biological and also neurodevelopmental factors as well. Okay, Amanda is going to take over and talk about how we can improve sleep now.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so how can we improve sleep? Do I just press? What do I press?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
That's
just
okay.
this one.
Okay. So the first thing to consider is the environment. So we really want to create an environment that signals sleep and stimulates sleep. So a lot of times, sometimes children will fall asleep in their parents' bed and then they'll be moved to their bed, or they'll fall asleep in the living room and then they'll be moved to the living room. And then sometimes we have a lot of those night awakenings and they need to either go back to mom's bed before they can fall asleep because that's the environment that was set up for them to fall asleep. So when we're thinking about sleep, we want to make sure that we have a space that is conducive to sleep and tells the child, okay, it's time to go to bed. So in terms of some things that we can do environmentally, so we can try to create, like I said, a space that signals sleep. Some of that helps in terms of research that's come out. It shows that cooler, darker environments help to promote sleep. So really looking at what is the temperature in the room. Is this room, does it get really stuffy? Does the child run hot? Do they get hot really quickly? So what are some things that we can implement to keep a room nice and cool consistently throughout the night? So can we have a fan, or maybe we need a cooler blanket if we've noticed that kid gets really hot and maybe they themselves are not good at just taking off the blanket. Maybe their first thing is to just cry to mom and dad. So let's try to set it up so that they don't have to go to mom and dad, or that there's things already there that they don't have that issue. Consider the amount of light that goes through the curtains or windows. So sometimes even just thinking, it doesn't necessarily have to be the blackout, the dark blinds, but maybe something that's a little bit darker and can block a bit more light for those morning hours. So when the sun is starting to go up, do we have something that can block light out? Some of our kiddos, they're afraid of the dark, so maybe we're not going to have a completely dark environment, maybe a little night light, but again, something that is not too interfering with the environment. Consistent background noise, so there is a lot of research on just having a white noise machine. Why that helps is that it helps to create a consistent sound. So if maybe you are in a busy area where there's a lot of traffic or there's a lot of noise that's happening at irregular times, or sometimes people's AC systems and things, they kick in, kick off, and they make different noises as well too. depending on the child and how sensitive they are, that can also be disruptive. So by having a white noise machine, it just kind of helps to create a consistent noise for that child to sleep. And then another thing that we could try to include is presenting a clock to help signal bedtime. So that just kind of goes with setting up the child to know, okay, it's time to sleep. Maybe we can have like a cool clock in there, and then it says, you know, like at 9 o'clock, this is the time that we go to sleep. So that could be an additional thing. There's a lot of white noise machines. This is just an example of one, but there's like really cheap ones, there's really expensive ones. There's a whole range of white noise machines out there. Some additional things to consider with surrounding environments is bedding or pillows. So this could do twofold. It kind of goes with sort of like telling the child now it's time to sleep. So if we are having a kiddo that like stays awake really late, they go to bed really late, maybe we could try to change over, or maybe that's when we introduce their nighttime comforter or their nighttime pillows to say, okay, this only comes out at bedtime or close to bedtime. So it's another thing to kind of just signal, okay, it's time to start getting ready to go to sleep. And that could be things that they like, anything that's kind of different from the daytime to signal now it's time to sleep. If the child likes cuddles from others, so a part of sleeping with mom and dad means that they get a lot of hugs and they get a lot of cuddles, then we could try to find alternatives that provide that sensation. So there are sensory blankets that provide pressure. So you can have a weighted blanket. That is an option. The thing with weighted blankets is that it is weight that you're putting on the kid. So you do want to make sure that it's supervised and that there are certain time measurements. Another way to get that same type of pressure is that they have like pressurized sheets, and it's really snug. So it's from the reviews that I've read, it's really hard to get onto a bed because it's really tight, but what it does is that it hugs the kid really tight, and it gives them that pressure without giving them the weight. Stuffed animals. So again, if they do like the hugs, maybe we can try to give them a stuffed animal that they can sleep with. And there are ones that heat up. So they're cool ones that also give you a little bit of that heat that you may get from your parents. And then there's different blankets. Another thing in terms of the environment is removal of items that may distract the child from sleeping. So if we've noticed that when we're trying to get the child to go to bed and there's those restrictive behaviors or the disturbances, so they're trying to play with their toys, they're trying to go to their iPad, they're trying to get to their books. So then maybe we need to just remove it from the bed or put it in a place that they can't get to it. So maybe there is a cupboard that's a little higher up that they can't really access. Maybe we can just put it a little higher up in the room so that they can't get to it. Another thing that's really important is a sleep routine. So we really want to make sure that we establish a consistent bedtime routine. So when we're talking about bedtime routine, we want to try to have a consistent time for that bedtime routine. So life happens, things may happen, maybe things may give or take a half an hour, but we really want to try to, if we're starting our bedtime routine at say 7 o'clock or 7:30, or maybe a little later, 8 o'clock, 8:30, that we're consistently sticking to that time. And then the tasks within that routine. So I just have a little example of what a bedtime routine may look like, but we want to try to have those tasks consistent as well. Really important when we're talking about winding down and letting the child know that we're getting ready for bed. These tasks help to get them ready for bed, and it helps to let them know that, okay, bedtime is coming. We want to try to include sleep readiness activities about 30 minutes before bed. So I have some examples. It doesn't have to be these things, depending on the child, depending on your routine. But we want to maybe include having a bath or a shower. So some kids like a bath, like a little bubble bath, because it kind of helps to wind them down. Changing into their PJs. Again, that's a very clear sign. Okay, PJs means time to sleep. Reading a book, so either on their own or with mom or dad. Listening to nursery rhymes or songs. Depending on the kid, maybe they want to practice some yoga poses. There's a lot of cool children's yoga out there. Or practicing some deep breathing exercises. So this is just an example of a visual that you can use with a kiddo, because sometimes telling them to breathe in, breathe out, they may not necessarily get it, but this is a really cool visual that you can just kind of get them to trace it. So breathe in, hold, breathe out, and they could do that, and it accompanies. And you want to, like I mentioned, ensure that it starts at the same time and the steps are consistent. And then depending on your child, sometimes a visual aid really does help with your child to let them know. So it gets them included, and it just kind of structures it so that they know what's happening next. And again, that's just an example of a visual of a bedtime routine that you can include for your child. Things to consider when we're doing a sleep routine. So if the child has issues giving up access to tangible items or wants to cuddle with mom and dad before sleep or during sleep, we maybe want to try to set up times that they can get access to that before their routine. So we're saying 30 minutes before bed, we want to start that sleep routine. So if we've identified that they really like going on their iPad or they really like spending time with mom, maybe then we can try to schedule or structure that time a bit earlier. So can we give them a good 30 minutes or 45 uninterrupted time with their iPad that they feel like they have enough time? Or can we structure a time with mom and dad, and not just like sitting down and watching TV, but like let's have some very meaningful, let's play a game together, or let's do some type of activity together before that routine happens so that they can feel like they got that time that they needed to engage in those activities. If your child still seems very energetic, so you're trying to put them to sleep, but they're just not tired, they don't want to go to bed. So maybe we need to try to put more high energy activities before that sleep routine. So maybe we can go for a walk, or maybe if they have a little trampoline, they could jump on the trampoline a bit. Maybe if we've identified that they like spending time with mom and dad, maybe that activity that we do before bedtime is a bit more activity, a little bit more high energy. So maybe we could do like hide and seek or a scavenger hunt, something that gets them moving around to burn off some of that energy. And then really trying to have the last few items in the bedtime routine occur within the child's bedroom. So like I mentioned before, really important that their room is a signal for bedtime. So that last, okay, good night, we don't want that to be in mom's room, or we don't want that to be in the living room. Even if we're reading books and reading bedtime stories with them, instead of doing that downstairs, let's try to do that in the bedroom. So again, their bedroom is starting to tell them and signal that this is where I sleep. Like Ben was talking about, so there are some biological considerations that may interrupt sleep or may interfere. So some things that we want to try to do, if we've noticed that the child is going to bed really late, or we are noticing that they're not very tired when they should start to be winding down, maybe they are taking too many naps during the day. So maybe when they go to school or when they come home, they're taking a really long nap. Can we try to reduce that, remove it, just try to lessen the amount of day sleep that they're getting, because now maybe they're just not tired. Avoid heavy meals or excessive snacking close to bedtime. So we don't want them to go to bed hungry, but we also don't want them to go to bed with a really full stomach, because that could be uncomfortable too. And then in terms of snacks, so I mean, if they're having a snack around like 7:30, that's fine, but really being mindful of what type of snack. So we don't want to give them anything that's too sugary, because again, that's probably going to stimulate them to stay up instead of go to bed. And we want them to be doing the opposite. And then to try to avoid too much water consumption right before bed as well too. Because sometimes if kids are drinking a lot of water right before bed, that's when we see that they're starting to wake up a lot because they need to use the bathroom. So just monitoring that. So this is something that you could try to do. This is more so if you're seeing that your child is going to bed really late. So it's called fated bedtime. It is a strategy, a behavioral strategy. Essentially, it's just changing your scheduled bedtime, so it is a moving bedtime. So if we've noticed that, okay, we're trying to get the individual to go to bed at 9 p.m., maybe we've implemented that sleep routine and we've done all of those things, but we're still noticing that they're still not going to bed. what we can try to do is that we can try to move their bedtime about 30 minutes later than the average time that they're going to bed. Does require a little bit of data tracking, and it is a bit more, there's a bit more steps than our other strategies, but essentially say you just kind of roughly took some data across maybe like a week or a few days, and you were just recording, okay, what is the time that they actually fell asleep? And when we say fall asleep, it's not, okay, Bobby, it's time to go to bed, good night. It's when Bobby is actually in his bed and showing signs of sleep. So his eyes are closed, his breathing is slower, he looks like he's actually sleeping. That's the time that we're recording, as this is the time that he went to bed. And then maybe we'll just record, we'll just keep track for a few days, take the average of that. So on average, it looks like Bobby's going to bed at around 10 o'clock or 10:30 instead of 9 o'clock. Then if we see that he's consistently going to bed on average around 10:30, we're going to try to bump that time down, and that's the bedtime. So we're going to start at 11 o'clock because we're assuming that now this is a little later than Bobby goes to sleep, so he's a bit more tired. So that's kind of what the fated bedtime is trying to do, is trying to set them up so that they are now tired, and all of those other behaviors that are happening are not going to happen because they're tired and they're ready to go to bed. And then after a few days, we're putting Bobby to sleep at 11 o'clock, and we're seeing that, yes, he's falling asleep within about 15 minutes. Then we're going to slowly push it back up to the time that we want him to be. We don't want him to stay at 11 o'clock because now he's still going to bed late. We just want to systematically get him back to 9 o'clock. This way, it's just kind of like with those sleep routines, if we've set him up so that he's tired, it's not going to interfere with your strategy of trying to set up a sleep routine. Hopefully you can get that sound, and then you can move up that bedtime. And then you don't have to worry about your sleep routine getting interrupted because it's been established. We're just moving the time up. So that's the goal of fated bedtime. Like I said, it does require a bit more steps, but that is the gist of it. And then there are some consequence strategies that Ben will talk about.
Okay, so some consequence strategies, so some things that we can do when children are participating in behaviors that are not conducive to them going to bed. So a common problem experienced by parents is co-sleeping, and this can be very hard to fade. There are different options in providing attention when attempting to teach your child to sleep on their own. So we want to put our kiddo in their own bed, in their own room, and have them sleep on their own. So the first strategy that we use is called a bedtime pass. And this is to provide the child a free pass that allows them to have one trip from their bedroom to visit their parents. So we're allowing them to have one time to get out of bed, go see mom and dad, get some attention, and then they're going to go back to their room and engage back into that sleep behavior. So after trading in their pass, parents will ignore additional attention-seeking behavior. So, if they're up again, they're trying to get parental attention, we're just guiding them back to their bed and just saying it's time for bed. Okay, so we're not going to engage in a lot of providing attention behavior. We're not negotiating at this point. They've already used their bedtime pass. We're just providing them with prompts to get back into their bed. If the child goes back into the parent's room, take the child back with giving them minimal attention. Some considerations when we're implementing this is that it's only effective if parents are consistent in ignoring additional attempts. So you really have to be committed to the strategy in order for it to be successful. If we acquiesce to the child wanting attention many times after they've cashed in their bedtime pass, then they're quickly going to learn that they have the ability to get your attention and that the rules of this program really mean nothing, so that they will engage in more and more of the challenging behavior around sleep. When we are instructing them to get back into their bed, we're going to avoid providing any sort of verbal reasoning to them. So we're not explaining that they have to go to bed or why they need to go to bed at this point. We've already established that it's bedtime. So we just need to prompt them quickly back to their bedroom. So I might provide a verbal instruction just once. It says it's time for bed, and then we're physically prompting them back to go to bed, but just repeating that step when they go into the parent's room. So that is the first one that we use commonly. The other one is scheduled visits. And this is when you put the child to bed, you tell them good night, you do the whole good night routine that Amanda has talked about, and then you leave the room. And then parents return to the room right after and provide brief attention. So in this, we're trying to mitigate any sort of challenging behavior that could arise if the child commonly gets out of bed to go back to the parents' room. So they're looking for that attention. We're going to bring that back to them in their room on a schedule that we're providing. So it's on our sort of terms that we're giving it to them. So, they're lying in their bed, they're engaging in their bedtime routine. We might go in, provide them some gentle physical contact, tell them, I really like how you're lying in your bed. That's a great job, whatever you want to say. And then you're going to leave the room and then come back in after a certain amount of time. So maybe 5 minutes, they're still in that room, they're still in bed. We're going to go back in and say, oh, great job, still being in your bed, nice work. We're doing that. And then we're going to repeat this until the child falls asleep. And we're gradually going to increase those time intervals, right? So we're going to start off maybe, if the child can only stay in bed for 5 minutes before they get out of bed to go to mom and dad's room, then we're going to, start at 5 minutes, and then we're going to increase that interval slowly. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, until they're able to stay in bed on their own without getting into mom and dad's room. So this strategy might take a little bit longer to implement than the previous bedtime pass, but it mitigates parents having to deal with a lot of those escalating, challenging behaviors that might disrupt other siblings, that, might be very disruptive for the entire family unit. Schedule visits, some considerations. It may negatively impact parent sleep as well. So if you have to constantly go into your child's room and reassure them, and you're increasing this, you have to stay up, so it might impact your sleep. And there's less potential for increase in resistant behaviors, like I talked about. So the motivation to engage in those resistant sleep behaviors should be decreased. So that's a benefit of that one. Ignoring bedtime resistance behaviors is very difficult for a lot of parents, right? So you put your child to bed, you followed everything that we said, you did a great job, you have your sleep routine, everything's going really well. But ignoring those behaviors, especially things like crying, screaming, can be disruptive to other children in the house and can also be disruptive to you. It can be very easy in those moments to want to give in to those challenging behaviors because it makes it easier at that moment, but it will prolong some of the sleep challenges that you're having. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at different strategies or when you're looking at bedtime resistance. So if you are going to be using any of these strategies that include ignoring, consider all the factors that will happen or could be affected. So if the child starts crying or screaming, do they have siblings in the house or grandparents or other people who are sleeping that might wake up? How could this behavioral strategy affect others, and what is your ability to follow through on some of the strategies that you put in place? If the child continues to scream or cry, how might you feel? Parents sometimes are like, yeah, it's okay, I'm going to let them cry, and then I'll just redirect them to bed. But then when they actually have to deal with that crying behavior, it can be very difficult to not give into it. What are actions or thoughts that you or someone else can do to support yourself in the moment or afterwards? So really thinking about, if you are going to engage in some of these ignoring behaviors and it's very likely that you're going to have to deal with tantruming behavior, thinking for yourself, how am I going to deal with this? How am I, what are some behaviors that I can engage in that can make this easier for me? Do you currently have the ability or capacity to consistently ignore challenging behavior? So if you can't consistently ignore challenging behavior, it might not be the best time to engage in sleep training for you, right? And your child. So sometimes what happens is that parents are like, yeah, I'm going to ignore this behavior. It's going to be great. And then they do provide reinforcement. So they do give in and they provide attention. And then they shape the behavior to be, more intense. So they've ignored a little bit of their child's behavior. So their child is getting out of bed. they're able to guide them back to the bed. They're like, okay, we've done this a few times. Then their child might increase that attention-seeking behavior and intensity, and now they're banging, they're screaming or yelling, and they aren't able to ignore those behaviors. Now we have taught that child the best way in bedtime scenario to get parent attention is to start with the screaming and yelling. So we've moved past the other behaviors that were manageable, and now they're just going to be more consistently engaging in those more intense, challenging behaviors. So consistency is key. Some additional tips that I find helpful. So tracking your child's sleep can help you assess if your strategies are working or not. So just tracking, the time that they go to bed, how many hours they're getting of sleep a night can be really helpful in determining, are these strategies working? Are they not working? Sometimes they can show you progress that you might not be seeing that can give you some motivation to persevere with some difficult challenges. Or sometimes they might give you information that, hey, this isn't working, we may need to revise this or change the strategies that we're doing. It can also help you find appropriate bedtime. So as Amanda said, taking some data of when your child is currently falling asleep can really help reduce those resistant behaviors if you're meeting your child where they are right now. So they're falling asleep at 11, that's where we got to start. So we're going to, start our bedtime routines when they're falling asleep so that they're going to be more likely to engage in those routines. And then we're going to use the procedure that Amanda had to sort of slowly shift it back to a more appropriate time. Recording what time they fell asleep and what time they woke up, and then watching watches for kids that have sleep tracking. You can also get devices that provide sleep tracking for your children that can tell you, when they're awake and things like that, if that's something you're interested in. Some different resources of books that we sometimes use and things like that. So, you got your classic Good Night Moon. These are things that signal it's time to go to bed. So having, a consistent good night book or something that you read each night can be part of the sleep routine that signals, this is the final step for bed. Right before this, it's time to go to sleep. And
I did, I included these 3 specifically because they do have like a YouTube read along. So if you are trying to kind of remove yourself from the picture instead of you reading the book, maybe having that YouTube put it on, they could read it and then remove the iPad. So that's another option as well too. There's a lot of read-alongs, but I know that for a fact that these 3 have a YouTube version. Yeah.
One thing, if parents stay with kids in the sleep time is okay or not? If when it's a sleep time, so parents stay with him or her in the bedtime, so it's okay or not? What do you think?
I guess it's dependent on you. So if, a part of your bedtime routine is that maybe, are you saying that they stay with them throughout the entire night?
Yeah, entire time. So when kid go to the bed, so parent read the book for kid. So he lay down with the kid or not just leave the kid in the bed and...
I would work on probably fading out your presence in the bedroom because they're going to be reliant on that, So it can be difficult to fade that out for children as they get older, and we do see that commonly with children who age. So they're, now young adults or in their teens, and they still require mom or dad to sort of lay down with them or fall so that they can fall asleep. So that can be challenging to fade as they get older. So it might be something you want to think of. How can you remove yourself from that step of bedtime routine? Because naturally, we all learn to fall asleep on our own, and it sounds like, that your child might need some help. But thinking about, is this the right time to do it? Is it appropriate for them? There's a lot of different considerations when you want to remove that step. And it's also what works for you and your family at that time as well. It's, having to fall asleep with them might be impacting your quality of sleep and things like that as well.
My son, he's 8 or 9 years old. So when I go with him, the sleep time, so I lay down with him. So he sleep very easily, 5 to 10 minutes. When I send him to the bedroom and just lay down by himself, so he can't. He's coming outside again and again and asking, come inside, lay down with me. So I prefer to lay down with him.
Specifically, yeah, I would maybe almost fade the distance slowly. So like you maybe sitting on the edge of the bed, then having a chair beside the bed, and then like moving the chair a little bit closer to the door to slowly fade yourself out, because I think discontinuing your presence in there is going to be really difficult for him. So you could work out sort of similar to fading, you know, the time, also fading your presence slowly out of there as well. Good luck.
No worries. Yeah. And it really is like it can take a little bit longer, and the main thing there is consistency. So you may have to be at like the edge of his bed for a little while before you move to, you know, sitting on a chair, moving to a little further out. And sometimes, yeah, like sleeping with him is easier because then you don't have to deal with all of those behaviors. But then when we think about long term, now we're just kind of building this dependency that he's like, I'm always going to need mom to fall asleep. And we don't want to get into a situation where he's now, like Ben said, a young adult and he's still needing mom to sleep with him. So it really is just working on that. But again, just like Ben said, like considering when it's best for you. So is there a time that you can have, like maybe you can do a switch off if there is another person that you can, you know, tag team the sleep training with? Or is March break a good time to do it? Or like summer break, like times where maybe life isn't as chaotic and it would give you the chance to do that sleep training. So it doesn't necessarily need to be now, but can we program a time down the line that you can actually do it and you can actually follow through with it? Any other questions? That's where we're at.
It might be a little complicated, so sorry.
That's okay.
It's about with lessening day naps. So I know in some situations when we're trying to establish a sleep routine, I guess it can also be relative to just self-calming and self-regulating. Some children will have those more challenging behaviors if they're having difficulty sleeping. But what would you do if you notice the naps in the day are kind of helping, but then at the same time it's like a dysregulated sleeping pattern at night? Which way would you go to kind of guide that?
So the naps are helping reduce challenging behavior during the day, but they're, you know,
but at the same time, it's still going to happen at night.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the best approach for that?
Yeah, you're in a difficult cycle where you're like, you have to fix the nighttime and sort of deal with some of the challenging behavior. Do you have any great suggestions?
That's pretty much what I was going to say too. Like, if in terms of the challenging behavior, maybe trying to see if there are alternatives to help that individual in terms of self-regulating. But then also, like, because sometimes sleep gets forgotten, but what we talked about right at the beginning is that sometimes sleep is actually a factor in these challenging behaviors, right? So it could be that, like, that individual is not sleeping very well, and now we're seeing an increase in that challenging behavior. So it is a factor. So trying to address the sleep, I mean, depending on the challenging behavior, if it is something that could be dealt with or, you know, kind of go through a bit before and work on the sleep.
I would think of like, you know, planning when I'm going to do this. Are there times, like Amanda was talking about, like where we can have days with reduced demands or activities that are even really enriched days, right? So, you know, let's program some days where they're really motivated to engage in different activities where they might want to nap, and it's less likely that they're going to engage in problem behavior. So can we reduce any sort of demands that might trigger those behaviors in them, and then focus on how we can get them to sleep at night?
Okay.
No questions?
Okay.
Well, that's it. That's all we had. So our emails are here. This is Ben's email. This is mine. If anybody has any more questions, in terms of like home management and other supports that community living has, you can always reach out to Hannah. She'll give you more information on that. And yeah, that's our sleep training.